Hey, before we start the story, please subscribe to the channel to help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Leave a like and comment below where you're listening from, too. Now take a deep breath and watch until the end if you dare.
The hospital always felt different at night. Maybe it was the silence between the distant beeping monitors or the way the fluorescent lights hummed like dying insects in the ceiling. Whatever it was, I never got used to it, even after 16 years as an ER physician. It was one of those storm nights when everything feels off balance. Wind screamed through the parking structure outside, carrying sheets of rain that slapped against the glass doors. Lightning painted the sky white every few seconds, followed by a low growl of thunder that made the floor tremble. I was halfway through a 12-hour night shift at St. Mary's Trauma Center, a sprawling, half-renovated hospital that smelled of antiseptic and old fear. The ER was packed, a car wreck, 2 stabbings, an overdose, and a terrified mother clutching her feverish child. Just another night. "Dr. Warren," one of the nurses, Ellie, called out, her voice barely rising over the chaos. "Paramedics on the way in with a critical trauma. No ID, male, late 30s. Found unconscious on Highway 71. They say, you need to see this." Her face looked pale, almost frightened. That was unusual for Ellie. She'd been working here almost as long as I had, and I'd seen her stitch together faces with the same calm she ordered for lunch. "What's his condition?" I asked, already pulling on gloves. "Stable vital," she said. "But they said something's wrong with the monitors. They keep flatlining, then jumping back, like the machines can't decide if he's alive or not." Before I could ask more, the automatic doors flew open and 2 paramedics rushed in, their gurneys splashed with rainwater and streaked with mud. The man on the stretcher wasn't moving, pale skin, short dark hair, soaked clothes clinging to his body. His face was oddly serene, like he was sleeping. "Car accident?" I asked. The taller paramedic shook his head. "No crash. We found him just standing in the middle of the road when we turned the corner. Then he collapsed." The heart monitor beeped erratically, 30 BPM, 90, then 0. The screen went black for a second, then came back to life. "Loose connection?" I asked, irritated. The paramedic's voice was tight. "We tried 3 different monitors. Same thing, we wheeled the man into Trauma Bay 6, the one farthest from the nurse's station." As lightning flashed outside, it briefly illuminated the room, revealing something that made my pulse skip. His pupils, wide, black, bottomless, didn't constrict even under the harsh fluorescent light. "Temp?" I asked. Ellie placed the probe. 86 degrees. That can't be right. I checked twice. 86. That was hypothermic, but his skin wasn't cold. In fact, when I touched his wrist to feel for a pulse, the warmth startled me. It wasn't just warm, it was radiant, like something inside him was generating heat far beyond human normal. Then the lights flickered. Every monitor in the room let out a distorted screech, like feedback from a radio. The EKG printed a line of jagged symbols I'd never seen before. Ellie cursed under her breath. The power's glitching again. But it wasn't the power. The rest of the ER was normal. I could hear nurses talking, machines beeping. Only this bay was flickering. And then for a split second, as the lights dimmed again, I saw something reflected in the stainless steel cabinet behind the patient. Something standing over the gurney that wasn't me or Ellie, a shadow, tall, motionless. When the lights came back, it was gone. "Doc," Ellie said, voice trembling slightly. "You saw that too, right?" I didn't answer. Not because I wanted to avoid scaring her, but because I wasn't sure what I saw. We started the basic resuscitation protocol anyway. Intravenous fluids, vitals check, oxygen mask. The man's heart rate stabilized around 72 beats per minute. His breathing was shallow but steady. He should have regained consciousness, but he didn't. Instead, he began to whisper. At first, I thought it was just air escaping his lungs, but then the sound formed a rhythm. Words. Ellie froze. "What's he saying?" I leaned closer. The words came out between slow breaths, faint and raspy, like something dry was scraping his throat. Don't let him back. My stomach turned cold. Ellie, did you hear that? She nodded, wide-eyed. What does that even mean? Before I could answer, every monitor in the bay shut off simultaneously. The lights dimmed until only the storm outside lit the room. The man on the gurney exhaled one long, ragged breath and smiled. And then the power came back. The monitors all read flatline. We tried CPR, defibrillation, nothing. After 15 minutes, I had to call it. Time of death, I said quietly. 02:47 a.m. Ellie let out a shaky breath. That was the weirdest, but before she could finish, one of the monitors, the one showing his pulse, flickered back on. 72 beats per minute, steady. We both turned toward the body. The patient's eyes were open, and this time, his pupils had changed. They weren't black anymore. They were white. Completely, blindingly white. When the patient's eyes opened, the world stopped. For a few seconds, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I've seen plenty of resuscitations in my career. I've even seen patients come back after being clinically dead. But this wasn't that. There was no gasping breath, no desperate lurch toward life. He simply opened his eyes, completely white, no pupils, no iris, just pale, milky light staring at the ceiling. Jesus Christ, Ellie whispered. The heart monitor still showed 72 beats per minute, steady and clean. His chest rose and fell in perfect rhythm. But his skin had started to change. The warmth I'd felt before was gone. His arms looked almost waxy now, the veins beneath the surface faintly glowing in the dim light. Alex, Ellie said softly, what do we do? I didn't know. For the first time in years, I truly didn't know what to do. Training tells you to follow protocols. If the patient's alive, you stabilize. If not, you pronounce. But what the hell do you do when they're both? Get a neuro check, I said finally. Pupils, reflexes, response. She hesitated, then moved closer, shining a pen light into his eyes. Nothing. No constriction, no twitch. Unresponsive, she said quietly. I reached out to check his carotid again. Still a pulse, slow but strong. I just pronounced this man dead less than a minute ago. I turned toward the monitors to check his vitals again. They were all perfect. Heart rate, 72. Oxygen saturation, 98%. Blood pressure, textbook normal. But his body temperature was still 86 degrees. It made no sense. Get him to the ICU, I said finally. Full monitoring. Then the lights flickered again. All of them. The overhead fixtures dimmed to a dull orange glow, and the hallway outside seemed to stretch longer, darker. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw movement. Someone standing at the far end, half in shadow. But when the light steadied, the hall was empty. I turned back and froze. The patient's head had turned toward me. His neck hadn't moved naturally. It was as if something inside had rotated it like a hinge. His blank eyes were staring directly at mine. I stumbled back a step. Ellie, did you? She was already backing toward the door, whispering something under her breath. The patient's mouth began to move. No sound came out at first, then a faint rasp, like dry air through rusted metal. D-O-K-T-O-R. I swallowed hard. My name was on my badge, sure. But the way he said it, slow, dragged, knowing, it didn't sound like someone reading. It sounded like recognition. Dr. Warren. Ellie bolted. I couldn't blame her. I wanted to run too, but something, curiosity, fear, disbelief, rooted me to the floor. The monitors began to distort again, symbols scrolling where numbers should be. I leaned closer and realized it wasn't random static. It looked like text, just not in any language I'd ever seen. Curved lines, jagged sigils, like something carved into bone rather than written. The patient exhaled again. The breath came out freezing cold, fogging the air in front of him despite the warm room. Then suddenly every machine in the room shut off again. Total silence. And in that silence, I heard something else. A whisper, not from him, but from the intercom. It said my name. I spun around. The intercom light was off, but the voice kept repeating, soft and hollow. Alex. I yanked the receiver out of the wall. The whisper stopped. When I turned back, the patient was sitting upright. His head hung slightly forward, hands limp at his sides, breathing slow. The oxygen mask dangled from one ear. I should have called security, but I didn't. I was transfixed. Something inside me, some horrible, primitive part, wanted to understand. Who are you? I asked quietly. For the first time, he smiled. It was faint, barely there, but I saw it. The corners of his lips twitched upward, his pale teeth just visible. Don't, he said, voice trembling like radio static. Let him back. That same phrase. Again. Who? I asked, heart pounding. Who are you talking about? But his body began to convulse. Violent, rhythmic spasms that threw him sideways on the gurney. Alarms shrieked back to life as the monitors went berserk. Heart rate 210, blood pressure unreadable, oxygen 0%. I hit the code button, shouting for help, but the words died in my throat when I realized his chest wasn't moving anymore. The monitors were beeping nonsense, lines forming symbols again, looping across the screen. The heart rhythm twisted into a jagged, rising tone that grew louder until it became a piercing shriek that made my ears ring. Then everything stopped. Silence. When the nurses rushed in seconds later, the patient was motionless again. The monitors reset, heart rate 0, flatline. But this time, I didn't try to revive him, because as I stared at his still face, I noticed something new. Faint burn marks on the skin of his temples, like fingerprints pressed deep into the flesh. And outside, through the glass doors, lightning split the sky again, revealing a dark silhouette standing motionless in the rain, staring directly toward Bay 6. I didn't chart the time I stood outside Trauma Bay 6, staring through the glass. The nurses had wheeled the body away minutes ago, yet the room still looked occupied. Monitors faintly glowing, the sheet on the gurney moving as if it remembered breath. I kept replaying the vitals in my head. 86-degree core temperature, perfect cardiac rhythm, 0 neurological response. Then a second death, followed by those marks on his temples. Every fact contradicted another. Medicine doesn't allow that. Either you're alive or you're not. There's no middle register for whatever that was. Ellie found me at the desk filling out the death summary for the second time that night. You okay, Alex? She asked, voice low. Just finishing paperwork, I lied. My hands trembled against the keyboard. Have you headed home yet? She shook her head. Power techs say the surge came from inside this wing. Not lightning. They're running diagnostics inside. That word lodged itself in my skull. I opened the patient's electronic chart. Blank. Name, unknown. Allergies, unknown. Lab orders are still processing, but when I clicked the timestamp, the screen froze, then filled with black text I hadn't typed. Stop looking. I yanked the mouse away, blinking hard. The message vanished, replaced by the normal interface. Maybe exhaustion, I told myself. 14-hour shift, caffeine crash, adrenaline hangover. I've hallucinated worse after 36 hours awake. Still, I saved a screenshot before the system could eat it. Ellie, I said, did we send his blood to the main lab or stat? Main. Should have been logged 15 minutes ago. Call them. I want every result, even preliminary. She left, phone already pressed to her ear. I tried logging into the telemetry feed again. The security cameras loop automatically every 30 seconds, but Base 6's feed refused to open. When it finally did, the image was warped, colors inverted, edges bleeding light. And in the center of the frame, on the empty gurney, lay a shape made of static, pulsing like a heartbeat. My stomach clenched. I scrubbed the feed backward. The distortion followed me. Each time I'd stepped into the room, the static flared brighter, like it recognized me. Dr. Warren? Ellie stood behind me, pale. The lab says the samples came back blank. Contaminated? No. She swallowed. They said there's nothing in the tubes. No blood, just empty glass. The power flickered again. Somewhere deep in the hospital, An alarm began to howl. The alarm's drone echoed through the corridors, a hollow metallic wail that seemed to vibrate inside my chest. I grabbed a stethoscope and my badge, forcing myself into motion before panic could anchor me again. "Where's that coming from?" I shouted. Ellie pointed toward the ICU wing. "The fire panel says mechanical failure in the basement generators. They're sending security to check basement." Of course, every horror story in a hospital always leads to the basement. We cut through the hall past the nurses' station. A few staff members were whispering about Bay 6, the revival, the lights, the scream that had crawled through the intercom. Rumors spread fast at 3 a.m., and I could feel the eyes following me as I passed. Inside the ICU, the storm sound was muffled but constant, thunder rolling like something alive. We reached the nurse's console. A young tech looked up from her monitors. "Dr. Warren, you might want to see this." On her screen were vitals for every admitted patient. 1 feet at the bottom pulsed steadily. Heart rate 72, oxygen 98. The tag read John Doe, Bay 6. "That can't be right," Ellie whispered. "We moved him to the morgue." "Double check," I said, already feeling dread climbing my spine. She called downstairs while I leaned closer to the screen. The waveform wasn't just a heartbeat anymore. Between the peaks and valleys, faint black lines formed shapes, curved, symmetrical, repeating. The same symbols I'd seen on the EKG earlier. "The morgue says the drawer's empty," Ellie said finally. "They think transport took the wrong body." I didn't answer. The static on the monitor began to rise again, lines coiling into what looked disturbingly like an eye-opening. Then the lights blew out, pitch black. Only the monitor glow lit our faces, sickly green, flickering. For a few seconds I heard nothing but the storm and the faint, wet sound of something shifting behind us. "The generator will kick in," Ellie whispered. "Any second." But instead of the generator, the intercom clicked on. A slow, heavy breath filled the speaker, followed by a voice that was definitely not human speech. Low, guttural, vibrating through the walls like subsonic thunder. The monitors all flatlined at once. Then from somewhere deep in the darkness of the ICU came the soft metallic squeal of a gurney wheel turning. Ellie gripped my arm. "Alex, he's not in the morgue." We edged down the corridor with only my phone's flashlight slicing through the dark. The beam caught the glossy linoleum floor, a broken wheelchair, a drip stand swaying as if someone had just brushed past it. The smell of antiseptic mixed with something faintly metallic, like wet copper left too long in the air. Somewhere ahead, a wheel squeaked again. Short push, long drag. "Security should be here by now," Ellie whispered. "They'll come," I said, though I didn't believe it. The storm outside hammered the windows so hard the glass seemed to breathe. Lightning strobed through the blinds, painting us in violent flashes of white. We passed the first ICU bay, empty. The second held an old man asleep under morphine, blissfully unaware of the nightmare crawling through the halls. The third, "Stop!" Ellie hissed. The curtain was half drawn, fluttering from the draft. A figure stood on the far side, back turned, head bowed as if reading a chart. For one ridiculous moment, I thought it might be another doctor, but then the lightning flashed again and showed me the truth. It was the patient. He was wearing the same soaked clothes he'd arrived in, hospital ID bracelet dangling loose from his wrist. His skin was too pale, his outline trembling faintly like a bad signal. "Sir," I called. My voice came out hoarse. He didn't move. "John Doe," I tried again. "You need to sit down." The figure straightened, bones cracking audibly, and turned his head toward me. His eyes were still blank white, but now a faint black liquid seeped from the corners, tracing thin lines down his cheeks. Then every monitor in the ICU came alive at once. Heart rates spiking, alarms screaming, machines printing nonsense strings of digits. Patients began thrashing in their beds, IV poles clattering. "Alex!" Ellie shouted. "They're all coding." I ran to the nearest bed, checking a pulse. Strong. The monitor was lying. They weren't dying. The machines were pretending they were. Across the room, the man took a step forward. Each footfall echoed twice, as if something heavier was walking just behind him. "Don't let him back," he said again, louder now, his voice vibrating the glass panes. "You can't let him back." I felt the floor shudder. Lights stuttered on, just for a breath, and I saw his reflection in every metal surface around us. Not one reflection matched his pose. In each, something taller loomed behind him, stretching upward into the ceiling, featureless and black. The lights died again. The figure was gone. All the alarms ceased simultaneously, replaced by the thin, awful sound of someone breathing right behind my ear. The next morning felt unreal, like the hospital existed in two versions of itself, one ordinary, one soaked in nightmare. By 7 a.m., the power was back, patients were stable, and the overnight chaos had been smoothed over by the morning staff's routine hum of clipboards and coffee. But the ICU cameras still showed static where basics should have been, and no one could explain the empty gurney prints that led halfway down the hall before stopping cold. I sat in the administrator's office facing Dr. Halpern, the medical director, and a risk management officer with a clipboard full of disclaimers. They both looked like they hadn't slept either. "Dr. Warren," Halpern began, "you've worked here long enough to know how rumors start. We can't have staff talking about resurrections and moving corpses. It undermines morale," I laughed once, sharp and humorless. "Morale? We have a patient who died twice, disappeared from the morgue, and somehow triggered system-wide electrical failure. That's not a rumor. That's data." The risk officer cleared her throat. "About that data, all telemetry from the incident is corrupted. No usable logs. The lab samples are missing as well missing." The word hit like a dull hammer. I leaned forward. "You're telling me the blood that wasn't blood, the EKG that printed symbols, the footage, all gone?" Halpern's jaw tightened. "We'll classify it as a record malfunction. File your incident report and get some rest." It wasn't a suggestion. On the way out, I paused by the archives room. Something Halpern had said snagged in my mind. Rumors start. That meant there had been others. I keyed into the old digital index, the one barely anyone used anymore, and searched basics anomalies. The list that appeared chilled me. Entries dated years apart, all labeled patient unknown. Cardiovascular arrest/unexplained revival. I opened the earliest file. The scan note was grainy, typed on a manual typewriter, 1978, male, approximately 40s. Found unconscious on the highway during a storm. Temperature 86 degrees Fahrenheit. Revived spontaneously. Spoke phrase, "Don't let him back." Expired again at 2:47 a.m. The same phrase, the same time of death. Footsteps sounded in the hall. I closed the file and slipped out, pulse pounding. By the time I reached the parking lot, dawn was leaking over the horizon, pink light filtering through thinning rain. For a moment, I let myself believe the nightmare was over. Then my pager vibrated. ER, code blue, base 6. I stared at it until the beeping stopped. The sun rose behind the storm clouds, red as a warning flare. For the next few days, I tried to convince myself that the storm, the corpse, and the missing records could all be explained. Bad wiring, stress, human error. But denial is fragile. It cracks easily under repetition, and the universe has a way of forcing repetition when you least want it. It began with the pager. Every night around 2:47 a.m., the exact time that patient had died again, the pager would buzz once. No message. Just the vibration, short and sharp. I changed batteries, swapped devices, even requested a new unit. Same result. Always 2:47 a.m. Then came the static. It wasn't the usual hospital hum. This had rhythm, like breath caught between frequencies. It started in the break room TV, a faint hiss that grew louder whenever I walked past. Later, it spread to the intercom. Once, while I was suturing a trauma patient, the PA system crackled to life and whispered my name so softly I thought I'd imagined it. But Ellie heard it too. We were in the staff lounge when the sound filled the room again, faint but distinct, like a radio tuning to the wrong station. Then a word. "Warren?" Ellie's eyes widened. "Tell me that was the air vent." "It's feedback," I said automatically, though I could feel my throat tightening. The lights flickered. For half a second, the reflection on the microwave door showed not the two of us, but three figures. The third stood behind me, tall and blurred, like a water stain trying to take shape. That night I dreamed of Bay 6, the curtain, the monitors, the black liquid tears. But this time the patient wasn't on the bed. I was, and above me something bent low, its face made of static and human outlines struggling to emerge. When I woke, my sheets were damp, not with sweat, but with condensation, as if the temperature had dropped 20 degrees in my sleep. I went back to the hospital early that morning, driven by a mix of dread and compulsion. I told myself I'd check the electrical grid, maybe review last week's blackouts. Instead, I found myself in the morgue again, drawn to the empty drawer where the John Doe had lain. The drawer's metal surface was fogged over, but through the mist, words were etched with something sharp. Don't let him back. I stepped back, breath frozen in my chest. The static rose again, this time from the hallway speakers, louder, clearer, forming half sentences I couldn't quite catch. Then the hospital lights flared and popped. A smell of ozone filled the air, and on the morgue's stainless table, a single dark droplet appeared. It spread slowly, pulsing like a living thing. I turned to leave, but the intercom spoke once more, the same hollow voice that had whispered my name. He's not gone, Dr. Warren. He's never gone. I followed the static, down into the basement, past the generator room, where the air always carried that faint, burnt copper scent. The maintenance lights here were dim, flickering every few seconds, as though even the electricity didn't want to linger. At the end of the corridor, behind a biohazard do not enter sign, I found a steel door that wasn't on any map. It had no handle, just a keypad so old the numbers had worn smooth. The key plate was dead, but when I touched it, the static in my pager flared so sharply it burned my palm. Then, the lock clicked. Inside was a small room lined with old medical records, typewritten pages, film reels, rusted file cabinets. The ceiling hummed faintly like a giant heart struggling to beat. A single label sat above the filing shelves. Project Bay 6 Revivals. I pulled a folder at random. Inside, photographs of different patients over decades. All men, all middle-aged, all with the same white eyes. Each report ended with the same sentence. Subject expired again at 2:47 a.m. under unknown conditions. Final words, don't let him back. A sudden gust slammed the door behind me. The lights flickered out. From the darkness, the intercom sputtered again, only this time it wasn't just static. I heard the heart monitor tone, steady and slow. Then a voice, not the patient's, not mine. Something deeper, dragging every syllable through distortion. We never die. We just find new hosts. The heartbeat quickened. The cabinet drawers rattled. Film reels unwound themselves, looping around my arms like veins. I broke free and bolted out of the room. As I ran, the floor vibrated under my feet, thumping in perfect rhythm with my own pulse. When I finally reached the stairwell, the power cut out again. A figure was waiting at the top, tall, blurred, shoulders too wide for any human silhouette. It tilted its head, and that same black liquid began dripping from the ceiling above me. I didn't wait. I ran through the emergency exit, up into the stormlit parking lot, and outside, every light in the hospital went out. The next day, the hospital denied everything. They said there had been no power surge, no basement breach, no Project Bay 6. When I went back to the same corridor, the door was gone, replaced by smooth concrete as if it had never existed. Ellie transferred to another facility a week later. She refused to speak about that night or the voice. I stayed behind, though every instinct told me to leave. Maybe because I needed proof. Maybe because I'd already been marked. It's been months now. I've started noticing things. Random blackouts that follow me home. Flickers of movement and reflections that don't quite match me. I tried recording one with my phone. All I got was static and a faint whisper looping back. Don't let him back. Last week I checked the ER log. There's a new patient admitted at 2:47 a.m. Unidentified male, early 40s, no pulse on arrival. I stared at the photo until my hands went cold. It was me. Same face, same scar above the brow. Dead on arrival. Now, when I walk past mirrors, sometimes my reflection blinks a split second late. Sometimes I hear the monitor tone behind the silence. Sometimes I think the thing that came through Bay 6 never left. It just needed someone to open the door. And I did. So if you ever find yourself working the night shift, and a storm cuts the power, if a patient shows up who shouldn't be alive, if the monitors start printing symbols instead of heartbeats, don't go near Bay 6, because whatever's waiting there, it's not done with us yet. The end.